Sometimes there's no one around who wants to do it. Sometimes there's nowhere to go to meet people that want to do it with you. Sometimes you don't feel like you're good enough, or you're too shy to ask anyone to do it with you too. And that's okay. Maybe it's your first time and you don't want to disappoint anybody. And that's fine as well. I'm talking about, of course, game jams. Hi guys, my name is Isaac and I am chaff.dev. Welcome to this video where we're talking about the game that I created called Reindeer Rescue, and how I sort of made my own little game jam to sort of motivate me to get it done. So the game is available on the Google Play Store. I'll put the links down below. Please like and subscribe, and thanks for watching. So about 2 months, I think maybe at the start of October when Halloween was kicking in, I decided I really wanted to get my first game finished. It's something that you read a lot about on any kind of forum or Reddit, or you see on YouTube. It's like how to get started in game development is, number one, just start or do game jams. And, you know, those kind of things, they are a little bit difficult to participate in when you've got so much going on around you. So I decided to game jam myself. And what do I mean by that? Well, I set myself some clear boundaries about how long I was going to spend working on this first game of mine, what it was going to be about, and the kind of sort of base requirements for the game itself. So I wanted it to take 2 months, and there was obviously a clear reason for this because my theme was Christmas. So it was the 1st of October, and I had to get this game out on the 1st of December for Christmas. Make a Christmas themed game. It has to be a platformer, and the art has to be somewhat original. And I said somewhat because I took a lot of 3D assets that were, you know, Creative Commons and turned them into pixel art. So they would be unique in that regard. And I drew some of the tile sets myself, but I didn't do a lot of different kind of artwork. I just did sort of, you know, I think it was 2 tile sets. You know, there's one character and another character. So you've got Santa and the reindeer. And the whole idea of the game was just get from one part of the level to the next and get to the reindeer. And I called it Reindeer Rescue. One of the other goals that I had for this game jam project was that I wanted it to be somewhat monetized as well. I wasn't trying to make money, but I did want to understand the process of monetizing a game on any kind of platform. I went with Google Play, and all I had to do really was implement the ads. That was my only goal. I just wanted an ad to play every time you died 5 times. And that was it. And there was a banner on the start screen. So the first thing that I had to do was get a controller, a 2D platformer controller. Luckily for me, I'd spent the last sort of 8 months working on fleshing out a 2D platformer controller. I had a whole bunch of other ideas in mind when I was designing it. At first I was going to make a Metroidvania, and then I was just going to make a platformer. But, you know, a lot of those ideas were too big. I needed to really limit the scope. It's another one of those things that you hear a lot of people online talk about. You've got to limit the scope. And so that's why I gave myself this goal of making a short little Christmas game so that I wouldn't get carried away with any ideas. And I still did. But luckily, because I had this character controller, all the features were already there. I didn't have to worry about adding more. I kept it very strict. The platformer controller was the only thing that I could use. I couldn't add features to it. So then that was all that was left for me to implement, was the way the camera worked, and that was a bit of a challenge, the win condition, and the pause screen and menus. Fortunately for me, there was a great resource online from GD Quest on how to set up a grid-based camera. Something that was actually really challenging was deciding what to do with the resolution, because the way that the grid-based camera worked, at least in this case, went off the viewport, and because of that, I was sort of limiting myself to a resolution that could only be set inside the game. You don't want to change it, because if you did that, when you got to the edge, it wanted to move to the next grid. So I had to decide how to set the resolution, and what I ended up going with is 21 by 9 is a pretty common resolution on mobile phones these days. So that was the base resolution ratio, I should say, the base ratio that I was going for. And anything else, so if you had an older phone that had like a 16 by 9 ratio, then you're going to get black bars at the top, because I couldn't design anything to work with this grid-based map that was varying resolutions, because when you got to the edge, it sort of shifted to the next grid, very much like you see in the old 2D Zelda games. I think that's what the tutorial was originally based on, and more recently in Celeste, which is something that I was taking obviously a lot of inspiration from when designing this. So the resolution was, or actually the ratio was fixed. Another thing that I found really difficult to keep up with was actually designing levels. Up until this point, I'd mostly just been learning to code, and learning to code in the Godot game engine. I hadn't really spent much time learning how to do game design at all. So this was my first time ever having to think about, level design, how I wanted the level to flow. Did I want spikes here? Did I want the death, like how does the player get across the room? Because it's not something I had to think about before. I just had to be thinking about, how did the player even move to begin with? So this was a big step up for me, and this is probably why everyone says that you just need to start designing and start making games, because if I just kept prototyping, then I never would have got to this point, understood sort of there are more difficult things than coding, and designing a game is really difficult, and getting it to feel good and be fun is harder than actually just getting the code working. That is hard, don't get me wrong. It took me years to get to this point, but actually designing a game and making it fun is also incredibly challenging. Massive shout out to Lost Relic Games. About a week before I launched the game, I made a goofy comment on one of his videos titled, let's have a look here, The Great Game Dev Delusion, about how people expect to make money off their games when they're just getting into game dev. Anyway, all I wrote was launching my first game in a couple of weeks. My target is $1, and if I make $1, I'll consider it a success. To be honest, I was just goofing around on the video. But a lot of people started asking me for the link to download the game, so I gave it out. And I think, checking the stats, it may be where I get 50% of the downloads from, possibly at this point still. So massive shout out for him not deleting that. I was a bit hesitant to actually put the link up, but there you go. I wouldn't suggest it, or in every video, to drop your game link. I'm sure people do that. Okay guys, that's all from me. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Put out my last video and we've got a whole 5 subscribers. So that's great. I'm super pumped about that. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.